Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us today for our session on earning the Professional Google Workspace Administrator Certification. My name is Lauren and I'm the Content Manager on the Google Cloud Community team. Leading our session today is Colin Neale, Google Workspace Technical Curriculum Developer, who will also be answering your questions live. So before I hand it over to Colin, I just want to mention that questions are encouraged today, so please feel free to use the YouTube chat box and we'll be sure to answer your questions either in the chat or we'll get to them live at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'm very excited to hand it over to Colin, and you can take it away from here with all of the content that we have to cover today.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Lauren. Yes, thanks, Lauren, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Lauren mentioned, I'm a technical curriculum developer here at Google. I work specifically on Google Workspace training for our end users, our customer admins, and also our deployment partners. I actually have a background in software engineering, and I spent many years helping organizations move from systems like Microsoft Exchange and Lotus Notes Domino to Google Workspace. The session today is all about helping you prepare for the PGWA certification exam. And I'm talking to you as someone who's been working in this space for quite a while, but more importantly, as someone who's recently taken the exam. Like you all, I do not have access to the exam question set. Wouldn't that be great? And I cannot actually share my exam experience with you. I'm sure you'll appreciate that. However, I will be I'll do my very best to answer all of your questions as truthfully as I can. So as Lauren says, we do encourage questions. If we don't get through them all today, then we'll be following up after the event. So we're going to start with a brief introduction to the certification itself, and then we'll get into the meat of today's discussion where we cover the exam guide. I want also to share some personal tips that helped me prepare for the exam, and also some things that I did whilst taking the exam. And then we'll answer some of the questions that we've already had prior to the event. And following that, I have a couple of example questions that we created just for today's session, just to give you an idea of the sorts of questions and how they're formatted on the exam. Finally, we will open up to any questions today. Okay, so let's start by having a look at the certification itself. At a very high level, here we see a definition of a Google Workspace administrator. Although we do know that the role of the Workspace admin can vary considerably from one organization to another. So, for example, at one end of the scale, especially in smaller organizations, you might just deploy Google Workspace and use its default settings. And the administrator may focus primarily on more common tasks such as user management and help desk support. At the other end of the scale, in larger organizations and enterprises, the administrator will be dealing with everything that touches Google Workspace, from user and device management, SSO and application integration, perhaps complex mail topologies, e-discovery, and user and data security. It's important to understand that the PGWA certification actually covers all aspects of the role. So you must be prepared to explore the full range of features available to you as a Google Workspace admin, even if you're not necessarily using them yourself. I do want to call out here as well that in the definition we mention programming languages. I think I can say with some confidence that you're not expected to be a software engineer, and you're not going to be presented with code samples in the exam, because the vast majority of administrators, even if they do have engineering backgrounds, it's not really part of their core duty. Okay, so this slide shows the areas that you will be tested on. In object management, you'll need to understand how to manage users, groups, calendar resources, etc. You'll be expected to know how to configure the core and additional Google Workspace services to meet your organization's needs. As you probably know, there are lots of services. So it's very important to pick the important ones. So Gmail, you definitely need to understand Gmail, Calendar, Google Groups, Drive and Docs. Those are the key ones. Those are the ones that I focused on. Troubleshooting is key. For example, how to support your users if they're having mail delivery issues or user sign-in problems. You could very easily get questions on that. Managing user and application access to data is also very important. Here you should be able to identify the various SSO options that are available in Google Workspace and understand how the sign-in process works when you do enable SSO. Finally, supporting business requirements such as e-discovery using Google Vault and reviewing and interpreting the admin console reports. Again, I want to call out here that you may not be using Google Vault. Many customers have existing e-discovery systems that they leverage alongside Google Workspace. But Google Vault is in the exam guide, so it is important, even if you're not using it, that you do familiarize yourselves with what it is and how it works. You don't have to, I think, have that in-depth hands-on experience with it, but most definitely look to the support center and look at what Google Vault is and how it works. Okay, so before we get into the detail, let's just have a few quick notes about the exam. It's 2 hours long. It consists of multiple choice and multiple select questions. There are no real prerequisites, but we do recommend at least 3 years of industry experience and at least 1 year of that being working as a Google Workspace administrator. I personally think that the experience is crucial. That's my own personal opinion. I do feel that just taking training courses and then having an expectation that you can successfully pass this exam, that may be possible, but experience is key. A lot of the questions that you'll get on the exam are scenario based. You'll be presented with a given situation and then asked to choose which is the best course of action to take. Really, only with real world experience will you know what actions to take. The support center is awesome and you can get all of the technical detail that you need, but in my opinion, there's no substitute for real world experience, plus some good training to back it up. The exam is offered in English and Japanese, and it can be taken on-site or at a testing center. On-site at a testing center, I should say, or online through an online proctor. Okay, so in addition to that real-world admin experience that I just spoke about, there are a number of training offerings that we have that can help you prepare for the exam. The Google Workspace Administrator Learning Path is available on Google Cloud Skills Boost, and it's a great place to start. There are on-demand courses in the form of our Google Workspace Administration series of courses. That's actually 5 separate courses where you get hands-on experience using the admin console. Plus, we have some hands-on labs on Skills Boost, where again you can get hands-on access to an admin console in a secure sandbox environment, so you can't break anything. Okay, we've also just launched a new skills badge. You can earn a skill badge by completing the Configure Your Workplace Google Workspace for IT Admins quest, where you will get to try out the admin role for real. You'll be provisioning users, groups, managing applications, setting up security, and managing Google Meet. And a skills badge is an exclusive digital badge issued by Google Cloud in recognition of your proficiency with Google Cloud products and services. And it tests your ability to apply your knowledge in an interactive hands-on environment. Complete the skill badge quest and final assessment challenge lab to receive your digital badge that you can share with your network. Here is a recommendation for how to jumpstart your learning. So these courses and labs allow you to explore and become familiar with workspace administration. The training, as I mentioned, provides a safe sandbox environment for you to test various features available to you as an administrator. As I mentioned earlier, real-world experience, in addition to this training, remains an essential part of your preparation and readiness for the exam. So that said, let's move on to the exam guide itself. So in this next section, we're going to take a look at some of the most important areas to focus on as you prepare for the exam. Again, my opinion, it's almost impossible to know everything about this. So Google is adding new features, new functionality, new settings to services and Workspace in general on a weekly, if not monthly basis. What I've done is I've picked the areas that I feel are most important to focus on, and these were the areas from the exam guide that I chose to study. So the first section, excuse me, is object management. So objects, we're talking primarily user management. So we're talking about provisioning of users, deprovisioning accounts, so how to create, how to suspend, how to delete accounts, how to update accounts, the different ways of creating users, one by one, uploading them through CSV, perhaps using Google Cloud Directory Sync, looking at offboarding and different options for offboarding. Do you delete an account, or is it an account that you might want to suspend because perhaps they have some data that you don't want to be purged? Editing user attributes, resetting passwords, adding email aliases, etc. Creating admin roles as well. As a super administrator, one of your jobs will be to create admin roles for other people to help you administer the domain. The next type of object that I would focus on would be calendar resources. So this is your buildings, your features, and your calendar resources. Google Calendar is extremely powerful, getting more powerful all the time. It's very intelligent. There's a lot of machine learning code in there to help you, to advise you what rooms are available, and closest to you, it can do automatic room rescheduling and make rooms available if only one person actually accepts an event. So it's an extremely powerful service. Calendar resources remain a core part of the Google Calendar service. You should know how to create them, how to manage them, how to delegate access to others so that they can manage the resource availability for other people in the organization. You should know how Google Meet works with Google Calendar resources. You also would want to understand how to troubleshoot calendar issues, and also take a look at the calendar settings in the admin console, but also switch to the user view and look at your own Google Calendar settings as a user. So it's important to understand my primary calendar, how I can share that with people, how I can restrict access both internally and externally. So you see both sides of the coin, because you could get questions coming up. A user has a particular problem sharing their calendar. What might it be? The next object that we would look at would be Google Groups. Google Groups for Business, where users can create their own groups. So you need to understand the different types of groups that we support. Also become familiar with the settings in the Groups for Business service. Again, the settings are being added to all the time, and it's very difficult actually to keep up with that. So it's a good idea to go in and familiarize yourselves with the different options that are available to your users. Then we have the groups that we create in the admin console. So for example, you might create a group that allows you to customize access to a specific service for a particular organizational unit or organizational structure within your account. Also look at Google Group security, the different levels of access and what people can do given the various permissions that you assign to them. Then we have shared drives. So how to create and manage shared drives in the admin console. This is fairly straightforward, but it is important to understand what you can do as an administrator and how you can also sort of control and limit shared drive manager permissions from the admin console to align with organizational policies that have been set. Now, I've put domains on this list. I don't believe domains are actually in the exam guide, but they are so super important. It's really important to understand how domains work. You will have a primary domain. Every Google Workspace account has a primary domain, but often you want a secondary domain or a domain alias. So you have to understand what the different types of domains are. Say, for example, that your organization has or is acquiring another company. Do you add their domain as a secondary domain or a domain aliases? There are pros and cons to each approach. It's important that you understand what those are. So most definitely go and take a look at domains because you could be presented with scenarios such as company acquisition and how would you manage that? Okay, so the next section will be service configuration, and here we'll be looking at managing services based on corporate policies. So by that I mean assigning and configuring permissions to Google Workspace services using Google groups, perhaps via the OU structure, modifying OU policies, implementing application and security settings according to the OU structure, and understanding how the OU structure works in terms of inheritance. So if I have a service that's switched on at a high level, can I override that underneath? And how would I do that? How would I allow people at one level to access a service and at another level to be prohibited access to that service? Administrator roles come into play here as well. So delegating identity and access management roles to other users in your domain, implementing security configurations around Google Cloud, Google Workspace Marketplace apps or add-ons. Also have an understanding of some of the settings that you probably may have seen but have just passed by. So things like whether you want to be on the rapid release or scheduled release track for feature releases, how to configure your environment for security and data region preferences, and managing content compliance rules. So I mentioned earlier that it's the core services that I focused on when I was studying for the exam, and probably the most important of those is Gmail. So go into the Gmail setting, the applications, core services Gmail, and take a look at what you can do with the Gmail service. You will need to have a basic understanding of mail routing scenarios for things like split delivery. You'll want to understand what a mail host is, how to configure end user access to Gmail. For example, some of your users may want to use Google Workspace Sync for Microsoft Outlook, so you'll want to enable that. You may or may not want to allow or prohibit POP or IMAP access. Again, you need to understand where these settings are and that they're available to you. How to configure administrator access for mail forwarding. So what can you do in the admin console that has a direct impact on what the user can and cannot do? So there are some things that you can change, policies that you can set that hide things in the user's Gmail settings pages. You want to have an understanding of the spam controls, allow list, deny list, inbound gateway, IP allow lists, what they are, when would you use them, When would you choose one over another? Email delegation as well. So really immerse yourself in Gmail. And the other core services I think that are super important are Calendar, Drive and Docs, of course, and Google Meet. Google Meet has grown significantly over the last couple of years, and it's becoming more and more important in the modern world. And most definitely delve into what you can do with Google Meet and the integration that Google Meet has with other core services. Okay, the next section will be troubleshooting. So it's a vast area. So here we're looking at mail delivery issues. So you'll need to be able to determine whether user behavior, whether it's user behavior that's causing a problem or whether it's a broader issue. For example, a compliance rule that is discarding email based on certain parameters, data loss prevention, implementation that is causing the issue. Determine whether the issue is actually expected behavior. For example, a missing attachment. It might be that the attachment isn't being delivered because Gmail is stripping that attachment because it's considered to be a threat. Auditing and reviewing mail flow structure and end user actions to determine the root cause of any issues. You will probably be expected to look at message headers and maybe audit logs, email audit logs, to try and determine whether, why an email wasn't delivered correctly. And also recommending and implementing the appropriate course of action related to mail delivery issues. So interpreting Google Workspace logs. This is again is a very broad area. That there are lots of reports and logs. I would focus on collecting the different log file types. I think it's called the off the top of my head, the email investigation tool. Looking to places that Google themselves have to search for known issues and application status. You may also be required to generate an HAR file if you're working directly with Google support. There's some really good support center articles on this and how to work with Google support to resolve issues. Identifying, classifying, troubleshooting, and more importantly, mitigating basic email attacks. So again, we mentioned this earlier, configuring email allow lists, objectionable content rules, phishing settings, spam settings, Gmail safety settings, quarantines, attachment compliance, secure transport compliance, blocked sender lists. Again, that's all in the Gmail space. So really importantly, you have a good understanding of those. You'll also need to understand DNS records. Many workspace admins aren't responsible necessarily for their organization's DNS records, but you will be tested on things like SPF records, a DMARC and DKIM records. So you need to know what they are, when to use them, and how to use them correctly, because it may be that it's that type of record that it's been incorrectly set up that is causing mail delivery failures. And again, the support center has some awesome documentation on that. So even though you may not have access to your DNS records, read up about them in the support center. Get yourself a good understanding, especially to those three: SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. Those are the three important ones. Okay, so let's move on. Let's move on to data access and authentication. Now, security is one of those areas that, when I was looking at the exam guide, I sort of expected there to be a section on security. There isn't one. Instead, the security topics are spread across the other parts of the exam guide. I definitely recommend going into the security pages in the admin console and having a real good look in there, what can be done. So even though it's not specifically on the exam guide, spend some time in that area in the admin console and delve quite deep into the various security controls, policies, and settings that you can apply. Okay, very important to understand that. So device management for data access and authentication. So things like Windows 10 device policies, the Google Credential Provider for Windows, GCPW, how to manage Windows devices from the Google Admin Console, Chrome OS device policy settings, Chrome browser user policy settings, basic device management, mobile phone, basic and advanced device management for Android and iOS. You'll probably want to have an understanding of the differences between basic and advanced device management, because you may be asked a question and it may say, what device management option would you choose for that? Also, company-owned devices as opposed to personal devices or BYOD devices, the options that you have to handle a lost or stolen device, for example. What can you do? How would you do it? So if somebody reports that they've lost their device or left it on the bus, what would you do? Okay, and under basic management, the personal device settings that you can apply, the policies that you can push down. Going back to Gmail again, Gmail's so important as well with DLP, data loss prevention. So identifying areas to secure collaboration based on data exfiltration reports, how to scan emails using Gmail DLP, how to implement Gmail DLP policies to prevent oversharing of sensitive data, configuring and implementing DLP options and data classification. This also sort of goes into Drive as well, configuring and implementing data classifications in Drive, configuring settings to limit external sharing of files. Again, that's Drive. Very important to have that understanding of the sharing options that you have to prevent data leaks. Okay. Third-party applications. So implementing security configuration options, setting up the Google Cloud or Google Workspace Marketplace. So for example, do you want to allow all of your users to be able to install any Marketplace app? Or do you want to have an allow list of applications that you approve for installation? Do you want to, as an administrator, you can install a Marketplace app for everyone, a domain-wide install. So you'll need to know how to do that, or would you allow your users to do that? Okay. How to push an application to a phone using mobile device management. How to configure Google as a provider for a SAML provider for a third-party application. So this is where SSO comes into play. If you're integrating, I'll give you an example. Let's say you're integrating Concur with Google Workspace, then you can do that in the Workspace admin console. Your users would sign in with their Google account, and Google will act as an identity provider for Concur when they access the Concur site, so they don't have to sign in again. So SSO, very important there. Another area is custom apps, both internally developed apps and third-party apps, and with specific a specific focus on API access. So you can, from the admin console, say that you want to disable calendar API access for everyone, or for all apps except internally developed ones or the ones that are on this list. So the defaults, I believe, are fairly relaxed. So if the user grants access to an application, then the application has access to that user's calendar. You may want to prevent that and restrict access based upon a list of approved applications that your organization wants your users to use. From a troubleshooting perspective, you'll need to know how to revoke third-party application access, how to remove any connected applications and sites for your users as well. And then we have user authentication, super important area, particularly around two-step verification. So what options do you have with 2SV? When would you implement 2SV with, say, a security key as opposed to one of the other options, like a mobile phone app approval? How would you implement it? So in the past, I've seen situations where 2SV has been enabled for everyone and enforced, and users get locked out of their accounts because they haven't actually enrolled within a given time period, and they become locked out. So you may get questions on what's the best practice for rolling out 2SV for your organization. Maybe you want to test it for a small number of users. You can do that using a Google group, by an OU, and then when you're happy that everything is working, you can enforce 2SV for a wider audience. And the other thing around user authentication, things like session timeouts, then basic user security controls that you'll see within the user profile, password length enforcement, things like that. So again, important to go into your user settings, look at the cards, the tabs that are there, and see what user profile settings are available for you from a security perspective. Okay, so I think this is the last section. So we have supporting business initiatives. I mentioned earlier that we had Google Vault. It is on the exam guide, so it's important to understand that even if you're not using it, in particular what retention rules are, the default retention rules, custom retention rules, assisting with creating matters, putting users on hold, particularly searching for and exporting content as well. Looking at the reports that are available in the admin console and interpreting them. So for example, user adoption reports, investigating issues in the alert center, looking at service outage for a specific Google Workspace application, investigating issues using data objects and metrics within any activity reports. And also creating things like creating group alerts that are triggered by a specific event. Data import and export, it's often forgotten. There are a number of ways to bring data into a Google Workspace account and a number of ways to take data out. I would just say be aware of what options are available for both sort of admin account level export and also user level import. So for example, can your users import mail from another mail service? Can your users import contact lists, calendars? And what controls do you have around allowing that or preventing that? Okay, so now I'd like to move on to some exam tips. I'm conscious of time. Okay, so this may sound obvious, but my first tip is always read the question twice. Okay, questions are they're not written to catch anyone out. They aren't, but there could just be one word in a question, and I'm thinking of one particular question that sticks in my mind where it was one word, that made me change my mind and pick option C instead of option B. So please reread the questions. It will really help you. So never rush to an answer, even if you think you know that answer. If you're unsure, what I do is I make my best guess. So if I don't know the answer, I'll make my best guess, but then I'll tag the question in the exam so I can go back and review it later. There's plenty of time. It's a 2-hour exam. I think there was around 50 questions on the exam, so there's plenty of time for you to go back and check. And it may be that a question later in the exam helps you come to a final answer on a question that you've tagged earlier. So tag those ones, then you can go back and check them and untag them before you do a final submission. Okay. Other areas are important to say. Become familiar with Google Workspace features, even those that you are not using. If they are in the exam guide, you will need to be familiar with them. It's difficult. You may be using Business Plus, but you may be tested on enterprise-only features. I found that it can be very difficult. But again, the support center, support.google.com/a. The admin help center is an awesome place to read up on some of these features that maybe you don't have available to yourself. I mentioned domains earlier. Again, domains aren't on the exam guide, but very important to have an understanding of domains and how they work. I think licensing as well isn't on the exam guide. I don't remember if licensing was on my particular exam, but important to understand how licensing works and how licenses are assigned and revoked based upon your organizational policies. Finally, just use some common sense. I remember some questions I didn't know the answer to. It was areas that I wasn't familiar with. I hadn't looked up. So if you're unsure, just apply some logic to help you decide what would the most appropriate answer be. Ask yourself what would be the right thing to do, or how would Google do that, knowing how Google works, and that often gets you through. Okay, so now we're gonna step into the Q&A for these questions that we've had posted prior to the event. So I'm just going to go through a few of those now. So is there a fee for this certification? Yes, it does cost $200 US. And you can find more information that there's a link here. I believe that Lauren that these links will also be available in the YouTube description. What is it and where do I buy it? I can't find it in Web Assessor or Criterion list. Yeah, it is offered through Criterion. That's where I took it. I went to a Criterion test center, and again that link will be in the YouTube description. This is a good question. What level of detail do we need to understand GCDS, which is Google Cloud Directory Sync, or G Suite Password Sync, GSPS, on the exam? So these are tools that have been around a long time. I actually used to work on the team that managed these tools, so I know them intimately. And they're used by many customers, but not every customer uses LDAP directory or Active Directories or uses Password Sync, which is a specific tool to synchronize Microsoft passwords with the Google password. I would say even if you don't use these tools, you should be aware of what these products are and when they're used. I don't think you need intimate knowledge of how they're configured, but I would look at them and see when they're used. It may be, for example, that a question comes up on SSO and GSPS, the password sync tool, has specific, when used with SSO, there are specific things that you need to understand. So again, I believe that the help center should be sufficient. You don't necessarily have to get hands on these tools. Okay. Is there any effective quick lab type of environment where we can do practical hands-on with the workspace? Yes, I think we mentioned those earlier. We have a series of labs. We have a quest. We also have the skill badge. So you can get that hands-on experience in a sandbox environment. And outside of Quick Labs, the Google Workspace Administrator series of courses, the 5 courses that we have, both on Skills Boost, Coursera and Pluralsight, you're also working in a trial account, a trial domain. So you have access for 14 days to your own personal Workspace admin console. I'd like to know what are the changing competencies since it was called the Professional Collaboration Engineer. It was really just a rebrand. The Professional Collaboration Engineer was renamed to PGWA based upon feedback from customers. So I don't believe that the exam content really changed. It was just that there was some confusion around collaboration engineer and what that really meant. So now it's got the new name. It more closely aligns to the target audience. Are there any exam discounts, vouchers, or free options? What about partners? Okay, so yeah, so I'm advised that partners get free certification vouchers, and EDU customers can get a discount. And again, the links that we're showing here will be in the YouTube description. Do we need to have knowledge of AppScript? Another really good question. I would say no. You need to know what AppScript is. Just like GCDS and GSPS, you have to know what these things are. But I've not experienced it. And I wouldn't expect, I'd be quite surprised if I was shown a code snippet and asked to identify the line that was causing the bug. So the other thing that I would say is you should also look at the admin SDK API. Again, you don't need to know everything about the API. You just need to know it exists, how it is used, and what it can do for you. GCDS, GSPS, they use the admin SDK API to perform their key functions, as do our migration and coexistence tools. They all leverage this public SDK API to do the job. So definitely go in there. It may be that you're given, is a particular scenario, how would you do it? Well, I could develop something using the admin SDK API. That might be the best option. So become familiar with what it can do, even if you're not an engineer and developing code using that API. What knowledge of GAM is required for the exam? As you can see, Google Apps Manager, that should tell you it's a very, very old tool. It's an excellent tool, but it's also an open source tool. And being open source, it's not supported by Google. It's considered a third-party product, so I would not expect to see any questions about GAM. Although GAM, if you're interested, is well worth a look to help you as an administrator do your, especially doing things in bulk, in batch, in the admin console. Can we choose our language? Yes, the exam's offered in both English and Japanese currently. What is the difference between the learning path on various platforms? Yeah, so the Workspace Admin series of courses that are available across all platforms, but the hands-on labs, the quest, the skills, skills badge, that's only available on Google Cloud Skills Boost. When does the certification expire? It's valid for 2 years. Originally, we were going to say that all our certifications are valid for 2 years, but I believe that might be changing. So this particular one definitely is 2 years. Okay, so in this section, I've got, I want to give you a little insight into the sorts of things that you might be asked in the exam. So I've got a couple of questions. I've taken them from another project that we're working on internally. So any similarity to real exam questions is purely coincidental. What I'll do is I'll read out the questions, and then I'll leave the answer slide up for 1 minute, which will give you plenty of time to make your choice. Then we'll look at the correct answer. Okay. So you're the administrator for an organization called Symbol Health, and each year your company hires a number of summer interns. Interns are given an email address and access to dedicated shared drives, but due to the limited nature of their involvement in the business, they do not receive an Active Directory account. You've been tasked with creating 80 new accounts from a list that you've received from the director of the intern program. What is the minimum you must do to create the accounts segmented away from any existing employee accounts? And I'll give you 1 minute. Okay, so time's up. That's about half the time, a little bit less than half the time you would have for a question on the exam. So let's take a look at the answers, and more particularly the correct answer. So the correct answer is highlighted in blue. So what you would do is you'd create a new organizational unit in the admin console, call it interns, and then you'd use the bulk user update template to create a CSV file, and you'd populate that file with the first name, last name, email address, password, and the org unit path for each new user. And you would upload that file, and that will create your new users. That's the correct answer. Answer number 2 is wrong. The question clearly says that these users do not get Active Directory accounts. So highlighted in red there is the first red flag for me. There are other things in the answer that also are incorrect, but that tells me that that answer is wrong. I will be working in Google Workspace, not Active Directory. Answer number 3, a little bit harder, but the key thing here that is a red flag is that we're entering interns into the CSV file, but we haven't already created the interns organizational unit. The organizational unit must exist in Workspace before you can add a user to it using the bulk upload. And again, answer D talks about Active Directory, and we know that we're not using Active Directory for these users. Okay, so question number 2. Recently, sensitive information was accidentally shared with an unauthorized vendor via Google Drive by a member of one of the research teams. The CEO has asked you to revisit the Google Drive settings to tighten security. However, collaboration with several partner companies that are involved in drug development cannot be impaired. The partner companies, luckily, are also using Google Workspace. So what configuration changes must be made to the Google Drive settings in the admin console to improve the security posture of Symbol? And as before, I'm going to give you 1 minute. Okay, so time's up. Let's take a look at the answers. So answer A, from Google Drive sharing settings card, change the sharing outside of Symbolab setting to off at the group level. Change the distributing content outside of Symbolabs to anyone to allow collaboration with partner companies. Well, this is incorrect. So if you disable external sharing, that prevents any files from being accidentally shared externally. But it also will prevent sharing with partner companies. Allowing the distribution of content controls the ability of your employees to upload files to other Google Workspace shared drives in other accounts, but that doesn't really contribute to resolving this particular security issue. Number B, answer B, that is also incorrect. So from the Google Drive sharing settings card, change the sharing outside of Symbolab setting to off for any organizational units that contain partner companies' employees. Well, that's a little bit confusing to me because I wouldn't expect my partner company's employees to be listed within my own Google Workspace account. So that's an immediate red card. And the second part there, changing the access checker setting to recipient only, really is just a warning that you're going to give to your users if they attempt to share something externally. It doesn't stop them from sharing. Answer C, however, is correct. So from the settings card, the sharing settings card, you would add the list of partner domains to your allow listed domains, and then change the sharing outside of Symbolabs to allow listed domains only. And you would do that at the root organizational unit. Then anyone within your organization can share content with anyone from those allow listed domains. And answer D finally is also wrong. So sharing outside of Symbolabs, setting it to on, it doesn't restrict sharing to just partner companies. You must set it to allow listed domains only. So I hope that gave you a flavor for the sorts of questions that you might be asked, and also why it's quite important that you really do read the questions carefully, because you can see that there are multiple questions within one sometimes. So it's very important that you have a good grasp on what the entire scenario is. So now we move to the next section, which is other questions. So I think at this stage, we have a little bit less than 10 minutes left. So we can take any other questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Colin, for that presentation. And it was fun to see everyone's guesses on those sample questions. So appreciate your participation. And with that, yeah, we have a few questions. We've been able to address most of them in the chat, but if you do have any additional questions, please feel free to add those in and we'll be sure to get to them live now. So first, let's start off with one that we've seen. Will we be quizzed on add-ons and scripts?
Yeah, I would say that you need to understand what add-ons are, how you can control your users' access to add-ons. For example, do you want to restrict users from adding add-ons in Google Sheets, and how you would do that. But I don't believe you'll be tested on scripting language or any sort of software engineering type questions. So definitely need to know what these things are, how to manage them, how to set policies for their use. But I would be very surprised if you're presented with some code that you then need to decipher.
Makes sense. Okay. And then we have another one here. We've already provided some information regarding the retake policy, what that looks like. But here it's asking, I already took the exam but did not pass. Do you have any tips on how to retake it again? So perhaps more from the content of the exam and actually test taking side of things. Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah, I guess, you know, sometimes if you've been unsuccessful, you can learn from that, because hopefully from the exam you'll have seen this, the areas that you are being tested on. One thing that I do believe is difficult for many is that, and I mentioned it in the session, that you may be tested on services and features that you're not using. So if you're seeing questions, again, I'll go back to Vault, questions that come up on Vault, and you've not used it, then take some time to go and explore Google Vault. You don't necessarily need to enable it and use it, but just familiarize yourself with what it is, how it works. So take from being, you can take learnings from that first attempt, and hopefully then be able to explore some of the areas that maybe you weren't exploring previously.
Makes sense. And this is a bit of a follow-up, but just to clarify, the questions on the exam are different each time you retake it. Is that correct?
That's my understanding. I should say I don't work on the certification team, but my belief is that there's a pool of questions, and when you sit the exam, the software generates a selection for you. So there's no real way of knowing what question set you're going to be given.
Sounds good. I think this is one more for me, but can you give the links for the slides? We will be sharing this information, the recording, key takeaways, the information that we've covered, including the resources and questions and answers in a recap post in the Workspace community following the session. So stay tuned, and if you signed up via the form, you'll be able to receive that in a message as well. So again, that link to the community is in the YouTube description, so keep an eye out. I hope you weren't furiously taking notes of every single thing, because we will be able to provide that information for you afterwards. Okay. One question here, and we might need additional clarification, but is if someone has the work permit at Google Workspace, then do they need DNS proof?
If someone has work permit at Google, does she need DNS proof? Not quite sure what the question is, to be honest, but if I can have a guess that we're talking about verifying your domain. So typically, if you have an existing domain, say I own acme.com and I'm on another system, but I want to move to Google Workspace, I'd want to bring acme.com with me. So I need to verify to Google that I own acme.com, and there are various ways that I can do that, and wizards that I can follow. If, however, I'm setting up a brand new company and I purchase acme.com as part of that workflow in signing up for Workspace, then Google knows that I own it because I bought it. So not. If I've misinterpreted the question, please do tell me. But I'm not entirely sure what work permit means.
Makes sense. Yep. And if you do want to re-clarify, you can ask that in the chat now or in the community. Okay, I think we have time just for one or two more. So are there any practice exams that you suggest if there's anything other than the practice exam questions?
Not that I've seen, Candice. I believe there probably are. I did look at the sample questions on the Google Cloud certification site. I took those, but I'm not familiar with any other practice exams. But I believe there are. I know for some of our other certifications, there are practice exams and books to help you through this process.
Awesome. So I think with that, we are at time, but we just wanted to say thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, Colin, for the fantastic presentation and information that you shared. Final reminder, there are resources linked in the YouTube description, and we'll have that recap post for you so you can check those out, how to get started. We wish you luck everyone who is preparing for this exam, and we'd love to hear how you do, share your success, lessons learned in the community. But with that, I just wanted to see, Colin, if you had any final thoughts or recommendations before we close out today.
Thanks everyone for joining. It's been awesome. Good luck, everyone. It's a challenging exam. It's a fun exam as well. I learned a lot just going through the process myself for the second time. So wish you all the very best. And thanks for joining.
Thanks, everyone. And we will hope to see you soon, and we'll keep in touch in the community. Thanks again, Colin, so much, and hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you.